Centrally, your whole approach represents a rejection of the empirical tradition in philosophy, doesn't it? Because, I mean, the very fact that you think that the empiricists are wrong about how we learn must mean that they're wrong about knowledge and the nature of knowledge. And the nature of knowledge has been the central problem in the whole empirical tradition of philosophy.
Well, the classical empiricist tradition, which I think was the tradition that's represented, let's say, perhaps in its highest form by Hume, seems to me to be a tradition of extreme importance in that a particular theory of the origins of knowledge, in fact, of the science of human nature, in Hume's phrase, was put forth. An empirical theory, and I think Hume, for example, would have regarded it as an empirical theory, did regard it. So when we investigate it, I think we discover that it's just completely false. That is, that the mechanisms that he discussed are not the mechanisms by which the mind reaches states of knowledge, that the states of knowledge attained are radically different than the kinds that he discussed. For example, for Hume, the mind was, in his image, a kind of a theater in which ideas paraded across the stage. It therefore followed necessarily that we could introspect completely into the contents of our mind. If an idea is not on the stage, it's not in the mind. And the ideas may be connected and associated. In fact, he went on to say there isn't even any theater. There's just the ideas. In that respect, the image is misleading. Well, that's a theory. And in fact, it's a theory that has had an enormous grip on the imagination throughout most of the to my knowledge, most of the history of Western thought. For example, that same image dominates the rationalist tradition as well, where it was assumed that one could exhaust the contents of the mind by careful attention. You know, you could really develop those clearer and distinct ideas and their consequences and so on. And in fact, even if you move to someone, let's say, like Freud, with his evocation of the unconscious, still I think that a careful reading suggests that he regarded the unconscious as in principle accessible. That is, we could really perceive that theater and stage and the things on it carefully if only the barriers of repression and so on could be overcome. Well, if what I've been suggesting is correct, that's radically wrong. I mean, even wrong as a point of departure. There is no reason at all that I can see for believing that the principles of mental computation that enter so intimately into our action or our interaction or our speech, to believe that those principles are at all accessible to introspection, any more than the analyzing mechanisms of our visual system, or for that matter, the nature of our liver, is accessible to introspection.
It seems to me that over and over again you come back to the same point. That is to say that many of the particular problems discussed and theories put forward by philosophers in the main, but also psychologists, and you've just mentioned Freud, and in your writings you mentioned many others, are in fact theories about physical processes. They are therefore open to checking by investigation, and when you check by investigation you find out that the theories are wrong. And therefore you are, as it were, radically subversive of a lot of very well-established theories in our tradition. It seems to me that what you put forward in their place, over and over again, in fact, does parallel the rationalist tradition. I said in my introduction to this program that what I'm always reminded of by your work is the theories of Kant. You seem to me to be almost redoing, in terms of modern linguistics, what Kant was doing. Do you accept any?
Well, I not only accept truth in it, but I've tried to bring it out in a certain way. However, I haven't myself specifically referred to Kant, but rather to primarily to the 17th century tradition of the continental Cartesians and the British Neoplatonists, who developed many of the ideas that are now much more familiar in the writings of Kant. For example, the idea of experience conforming to our mode of cognition, or well, particularly in the British Platonists, Cudworth, for example, I believe, there's a rich mine of insight into the organizing principles of the mind by which experience is structured. In fact, I think probably that's some of the richest source of psychological insights that I know. And that's the one, it's this tradition that I think that can be fleshed out and made more explicit by the kinds of empirical inquiry that are now possible. Of course, I think we also have to diverge from that tradition in a number of respects. I've mentioned one, namely the belief that the contents of the mind are open to introspection. Similarly, we There's certainly no reason to accept the metaphysics of that tradition, to believe that there's a dualism of mind and body. I mean, you can see why the Cartesians were led to that. It was a rational move on their part, but it's not a move that we have to follow. We have other ways of approaching that question.